grievances. Last night, Donald Trump delivered his much-hyped primetime speech full of nonsense about made-up voter fraud, and it was just a flop. CNN, ABC, NBC didn't even air the speech live. Fox did take it live, but man, they ran away from it as quick as they could. Moving on, never returned to it, not even on Trump's favorite morning show on the Curvy Couch, Fox and Friends. Fox also dedicated basically no time to promoting his remarks. I can think of 11,000 reasons why. The speech was both ridiculous and embarrassing, but it was also at the same time a dangerous escalation. Because Trump has started to reassemble the gang behind January 6th. Earlier this week, the White House hosted about 24 Trump-aligned activists, including conservative attorney Cleta Mitchell. That was the woman who advised Trump on his infamous January 2021 phone call, threatening Georgia's Secretary of State to find 11,000 plus votes to overturn Trump's loss to Biden. Now, 5.5 years later, Trump is back in power. He's gathered more craven allies to peddle his lies and threaten election officials all over again.
If the election officials, once we gave them the information they need to secure their elections, and they chose not to, then those individuals can also be held accountable by fines, by penalties, and even, depending on how far it goes, prison time.
Rick Hasen's a professor of law and the director of Safeguarding Democracy Project at UCLA Law School. He joins me now. Rick, I've been torn both in the speech last night and then Mark Wayne Mullen, who you saw there today with his sort of directives and threats. There's sort of two thoughts. One is that this is sort of pathetic and impotent and kind of flailing. And the other is that it's incredibly dangerous because they're really going to try to do this. And I'm curious, as someone who spends all your time thinking about this, like where you are on that spectrum.
Well, I was really underwhelmed by not just the delivery, which was kind of a low energy delivery, but the substance. It was kind of retreads of the things he had said before. There's really nothing new there. He didn't even make his usual claims that the elections were stolen or rigged. And then really in terms of what he offered as to what he's going to do is he implored Congress to pass the Save America Act, which would, make it harder for people to register and vote. But Congress is not going to do that, so far as we could tell. It's stuck in the Senate. So I was actually a little relieved at the end. And then once, these documents started coming out, they didn't really support any of the claims he was making about massive non-citizen voting or about Chinese interference with the elections. And so I saw what DHS Secretary Mullen was doing was just kind of pleasing the old man, saber rattling. And I'm hopeful, so long as we don't have a really close election, that we're going to be able to squeak by through this 2026 midterm without Trump being able to significantly interfere.
Well, you raise one thing which is important, which is the margins will matter a lot for the outcome. I mean, I really do. Although, again, my nightmare scenario is that James Talarico beats Ken Paxton by 5,000 votes in Texas. And I really think you will see them pull out every possible stop. And one of the reasons I think that is, here's Cleta Mitchell. Again, she was there in 2020. She's back in the president's orbit. Here she is talking about the need to sort of override the distributed nature of American elections, something Steve Bannon's been talking about a lot. There's some sort of push for nationalization. Take a listen.
The president's authority is limited. The chief executive is limited in his role with regard to elections, except that where there is a threat to the national sovereignty of the United States, as I think that we can establish with the porous system that we have, then I think maybe the president is thinking that he will exercise some emergency powers to protect the federal elections going forward.
This seems like a plan Bannon's talked about, some sort of national emergency, some sort of federalization. How does that scan to you?
Well, I mean, the thing to understand is the president has no power over elections. Our system is decentralized. It's states and localities. So if he tries to do something, there's going to be the courts, there are going to be the states, there are going to be the people who are going to be available to fight back. Mitchell has been saying this, I think, since the beginning of Trump's second term. And he's certainly being pushed in that direction. And, when he's meeting with these people, it's quite dangerous. And we have to think about situations like, what if Trump sends the DOJ to collect ballots before they've been tabulated? What if there are attempts to try to interfere with how election administrators are doing their jobs? But so far, it's been all talk and no action, and I'm hoping that trend continues.
Well, but there's a little bit of action, right? They've threatened, they've very much tried to get the voter rolls. They've been stopped in court. They have initiated the executive order on mail voting, which today an appeals judge sort of put back on track. I think it's going to get stopped again. They have fired the Election Assistance Commission commissioners, and they're now talking about maybe Kurt Olson, who again is like a Cleta Mitchell, like, you know, big lie partisan, putting on that board. So it's not. It's they're doing stuff. It's just that it doesn't seem to have penetrated the essential plumbing of the system yet. If that's how I would characterize it.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, I think the things that he did, getting rid of the AC commissioners, so if he's actually concerned about voting machine vulnerability, you don't get rid of the body that helps states and localities figure out the standards for voting machines to make sure that they're secure. He also decimated CISA, the part of our cybersecurity defenses, which state and local authorities really need to help them to prevent foreign interference. You know, so all the things he's saying he's worried about, he's actually made things harder. The system is considerably worse here. But the question is, you know, what are the levers that Trump could try and push to actually change how the elections are run? And that's where he's having a hard time. He's not getting cooperation with Congress. He's not getting cooperation from most of the states. And so really, the end game, I think, is going to be, like you said, if there's a very close election in Texas, or there are a few states where we don't know who's won the congressional race and the control of the House of Congress turns in that, then I think all bets are off, and we're going to see the same thing we saw after Trump narrowly lost the 2020 election. But if the margins are large enough, then I don't think he's really going to be able to accomplish much. And then hopefully, because he won't be running for re-election, he'll lose interest in how our elections are run. That's kind of the best case scenario.
Well, yes, that is the best case scenario. But yes, the margins are going to matter a lot. The actual outcome, who the people want to represent them, still, I think, will control in the end. We'll see what happens. Rick Hasen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, some really disturbing new reporting about the ICE agent who reportedly pulled the trigger in that fatal shooting in Maine. That's next.